I've been playing Minecraft for over 10 years now, and most of that time was spent on the console versions of the game. Recently, however, I managed to get a gaming PC, and I've already spent a lot of hours playing the Java edition of Minecraft. I also noticed some big differences between it and the Bedrock edition. Some I love, and others not so much. I'm going to give a brief overview of Java and talk about how we even got to Bedrock, as before we had the Legacy console edition. After that, I'll go over each of the differences I noticed during my transition from Bedrock to Java. Minecraft Java was the first version of Minecraft and underwent development from 2009 to 2011, releasing for Mac, Linux, and Windows. It was coded in Java and went through several development stages that gradually shaped it into the game we know today. The first few versions hardly resemble ours, as the classic version spawned you in a tiny world where you only had 9 items to play around with, and even though you were in creative mode, you couldn't fly. It did have some useful and interesting features though, such as the ability to clone yourself by pressing G, the ability to return to spawn by pressing R, and the ability to toggle fog by pressing F. By the time Minecraft got to Alpha, however, survival mode was really getting off its feet, and many players actually still prefer Alpha over the Minecraft versions we have today, as it's missing the hunger bar and has that nostalgic Minecraft feel. Minecraft Java would also be defined by its vast majority of add-ons like mods and shaders. Mods modified the game by introducing new items, blocks, biomes, mobs, or just changing the game behavior, while shaders aim to enhance the game visuals by introducing more complex lighting systems and making water look more detailed and realistic. Java continues to be the home for these type of add-ons, as in Bedrock they're either unavailable, hard to install, or locked behind a paywall. This is one of the many reasons why a lot of people prefer Java, or at least look forward to playing on it someday. Back in middle school, I was definitely one of those people that wanted to play Minecraft Java, but all I had access to was my mom's laptop, which probably had less than a gigabyte of RAM and absolutely no graphics card. I also had no money, so I resorted to going on sketchy websites to try to get the game for free. And after doing all this and finally being able to play, the game ran like a potato. I had to turn the render distance and effects all the way down, and I still wasn't even reaching 30 FPS. I didn't have a mouse either, so I had to use the trackpad to move the cursor and the number keys to move between the hotbar. You'd probably think that with game performance like this, I'd run away really quick, but no, I kept playing for a while and I even tried downloading mods, but they didn't work on whatever bootleg version of Minecraft I was running. The Legacy Console Edition was Minecraft's introduction to consoles, and it was first released for Xbox 360 in 2012, and then for PS3 in 2013. Just the fact that Minecraft was released for consoles was a huge deal, as many people who didn't have PCs really wanted to play the game. I was looking at the comments under the E3 2011 reveal for Minecraft on the Xbox 360, and people seemed really excited for it, although a lot of the comments were just people joking about how good of an exercise they would get using the Kinect. When the game did release, Xbox 360 players were given a version that corresponded to Java's beta 1.6.6 version, which meant that it would be about a year behind and would continue to be behind until Bedrock came along. The Legacy Edition also ran at a smooth 60 frames per second, while having a control scheme that made sense for an Xbox controller. Developers try to preserve Java Minecraft as much as possible when bringing it to consoles, and it's important to note that this version was coded on C++ rather than Java. Developers couldn't preserve infinite worlds, however, due to the limitations of the Xbox 360 and PS3, so these games instead had worlds which were limited to 864 by 864 blocks or 54 by 54 chunks. The worlds were really tiny, and even current render distances put these world sizes to shame, as the PC Bedrock version can give you a render distance of 71 chunks, while the Java edition using Optifine can give you a render distance of 64 chunks. Speaking of render distance, Legacy was actually missing the option to adjust its render distance, so I'm guessing they chose the best possible render distance they could give the player without sacrificing game performance. Either ways, render distance was pretty vague in those days of Minecraft, and I'm talking 2012 to 2013. It's not like today where you can see the exact chunks. Back then, the Java render distances were categorized as tiny, short, normal, and far. Minecraft didn't tell you the exact chunk amount of these render distances, but with some digging, I found out that tiny is 2 chunks, short is 4, normal is 8, and far is 16. And then doing some very scientific research, I've concluded that the PS3 and 360 versions had a render distance of about 10 chunks, so these versions sat somewhere between Java's normal and far render distances. Even though Legacy was limited in some ways, it did have something that Java didn't: instructions. The Java edition has always taken pride in the fact that it doesn't have tutorials, as Notch didn't think it was possible to make a tutorial for Minecraft. Legacy, however, came out of left field and decided to do the unthinkable, making the game easily accessible for new players. It did this in many ways, starting with a tutorial world, which taught players the basics of the game. And for those that just wanted to jump into a new world, there were also tutorials that would pop up in the corner of the screen and teach players about the game's mechanics. The game controls were also displayed on the screen to help players, and within the inventory, pressing the right trigger while hovering over an item would show its description, and players could learn what it was used for. The crafting interface also contained every recipe for any craftable item, which was useful as Minecraft has so many different crafting recipes. Apart from being beginner friendly, this version also had its own exclusive features, like spawning with maps, the player character being visible, the ability to adjust autosave, and its very own crafting interface. Starting with locator maps, which have come to be associated with Legacy, even though Java did have them, but Legacy differed in that you actually spawned with one in your inventory. Because of this, maps were generally used more in Legacy, and they also fit those small worlds really well, as one map covered the entire world. Exploring and discovering structures was really fun using these maps, and they also came in handy when playing multiplayer, as you could see another player's location. The in-game player character is another feature that's largely associated with the console editions of the game, and the current Bedrock version still has it. This feature lets you see your character in the top left corner of the screen, and appears when crouching, sprinting, and now also swimming. It was a useful feature in that a player could know if they were crouched or not, as in these console versions you click to crouch, as opposed to holding shift to crouch. People also liked that you could see your skin, as in the Java version you can't really ever see your skin without opening the inventory or going into third-person mode. The Legacy version also differed in its saving and autosave mechanics, as it introduced a save game button and autosave settings. These settings let you choose to save anywhere from never to every 2 hours, which gave you full control over when you wanted to save. The Java version, on the contrary, didn't have any of these options, and instead saved every 45 seconds, which felt like the game was constantly saving. It honestly gave the impression that the PS3 and Xbox 360 didn't have enough power to save as frequently, but it could be seen as a positive, as players could go back to a previous save if they ever died or lost any items. It's really interesting that they added this because Java still doesn't have autosave settings unless you install Optifine. Lastly, I want to talk about Legacy's crafting interface, which was removed when it transitioned to Bedrock in 2017. This transition vastly changed the Legacy edition by adding new features and removing some old ones. The crafting interface was completely overhauled and turned into Java's interface, which uses a 3x3 grid and has a recipe book tab as well. Many people disliked the new crafting interface and felt it wasn't well optimized for a controller, as Legacy's system was specifically made for a controller. Bedrock's crafting does get a lot of hate, and I really think it comes down to personal preference, as I actually find the Bedrock crafting to be a bit faster, but I dislike the recipe book. The reason I think Legacy is slower is that it categorizes items into 7 different sections, and within those sections, similar items are grouped together into one slot. I think that scrolling through these sections and looking for a specific item takes up a lot of time, whereas in Bedrock, all the craftable items are available in one section, and I can get to any one item a lot quicker. Legacy did, however, have the option to show only craftable items, but even then, it didn't remove the 7 sections, and you still had to scroll through them to find an item. This is all assuming, of course, that you already know exactly what you want to craft and how to craft it. While I consider Bedrock to be faster than Legacy, I do have one big issue with its crafting, that it chose to include recipe book rather than having a full catalog of recipes like Legacy does. The recipe book was introduced to Java in 2017 and has to be one of Minecraft's most redundant features. The recipe book will show recipes that you've unlocked, and at first I was confused by how a recipe was unlocked. I thought that it was done by having at least one ingredient that goes into making something, which would make at least a little sense. But rather than that, there's actually this arbitrary list of items that can trigger certain recipes to unlock, and usually the item is an ingredient in that recipe. Take for example the recipes for wooden tools, which require both sticks and wooden planks, but only the sticks can trigger the recipe to pop up, and the wooden planks can't. It's like this for all recipes, where they pick an arbitrary ingredient used in that recipe, and make that ingredient the requisite for unlocking the recipe. This pretty much means that the recipe book will only be helpful if you get lucky and happen to have one of the arbitrary items. I'd much rather have a recipe book like Legacy's, which contains all the recipes and doesn't even pretentiously call it a recipe book. Minecraft Bedrock Edition is a port of Minecraft's Pocket Edition, which was brought to consoles and other platforms. Given that consoles already had Legacy as their Minecraft version, Microsoft chose to discontinue Legacy in favor of Bedrock. It was done in an attempt to unite all platforms under one Minecraft version and implement crossplay. Microsoft started this in 2017 with the Xbox One, but bringing Bedrock to PS4 and Nintendo Switch would prove more difficult as the PS4 didn't receive Bedrock until 2018 and the Nintendo Switch didn't receive it until 2019. Bedrock changed a lot from Legacy, and many players were disappointed with the new version of Minecraft, as it removed in-game tutorials, item descriptions, autosave settings, and the old crafting interface. But it also added a bunch of things, with some of the more significant ones being infinite worlds, crossplay, the tradition of receiving major updates at the same time that Java does, and the ability to adjust render distance. Bedrock overall has mixed feedback among console players, as some resent all the good features it removed, while others relish in everything it added. I followed Minecraft through both of these console editions and played my fair share of each of them, starting on the PS3 and moving on to the PS4 and Xbox Series S. Throughout this time I always wanted to play the Java version so I could mess around with mods and shaders. Now that I finally have played it, I find it surprising that it's not the mods and shaders that make me prefer it. It's the many quality of life improvements that I feel it has over Bedrock, and it's probably not right to call them improvements as the Java version was here before Bedrock, but that's honestly what they feel like. Don't get me wrong though, because Java isn't perfect, and there are definitely things that I prefer about Bedrock. Now before I get into my list of improvements, I want to talk about a little performance test that I did, and some of the stuff I noticed while doing it. These are mainly creative mode differences. The first one is that you can't sprint while flying in Java, and the only way to do it is to start sprinting on the ground and then immediately double tap the spacebar to fly. Also, you can't shift click items into your hotbar from the creative inventory, so there's that as well. On the other hand, I noticed that in Bedrock, certain objects like grass, bamboo, and vines disappear at large distances and make the worlds look really dead and barren. The Java version just holds up a lot better in this regard, and you can see all these little details from very far. For my small performance test, I flew around in creative while setting the game at a render distance of 64 chunks. I ran both versions of Minecraft on my computer, with Java running Optifine, as you can't get a 64 chunk render distance in vanilla Java. With Bedrock, the most I managed to hit was 40 FPS while sprint flying in creative, but I did notice that the chunks were loading super quick. On Java, I was actually getting 80 to 90 FPS while having my render distance set to 64 chunks, but this is pretty misleading as the chunks weren't loading fast enough to reach 64. When I did wait and let the chunks load up to 64, the performance dropped dramatically. The Bedrock version loads chunks a lot quicker and maintains a higher FPS with the chunks fully loaded. It may not seem like a huge difference on my system, but I could definitely see how some lower end hardware may only be able to run Bedrock at a playable FPS. I wanted to mention performance as when you watch a lot of the comparison videos on YouTube, most of them talk about how Bedrock has a better performance, and yeah, it definitely does. With that out of the way, I'm going to start my list of improvements with Java's control layout, which is very different from what you would find on a controller. You use the keyboard keys to move your character, and the mouse to move your cursor and to select items in your inventory. I'm mainly going to talk about the mouse as I think it's what makes a world of difference between a computer layout and a controller. This is because every function done in Minecraft is easier and more practical with a mouse and keyboard. Things like managing one's inventory and crafting feel more satisfying due to the extreme precision of a computer mouse. Like when I need to access something in my inventory, I can get to it almost instantly with my mouse, no matter where it's at. But why is this? With a controller, you'll be using the right stick to control the cursor that selects items, and this cursor never feels as precise as a mouse. You can adjust the cursor's sensitivity to slow it down and make it more precise, but then it just ends up feeling too sluggish. The mouse pointer, on the other hand, doesn't have a constant sensitivity and instead varies by how fast you move the mouse. And this is what makes a world of difference when it comes to precision, as it gives you so much more control over the cursor you're seeing on your screen. Because of a mouse's variable sensitivity, actions like shift-clicking items in and out of the hotbar or into chests, evenly distributing items by holding down left-click, placing one item per slot by holding down right-click, or moving multiple stacks of items into chests all feel super satisfying, and I can't believe what I was missing out on. It's now kind of hard to go back to using a controller, especially because Minecraft revolves around the inventory, so it's very important that it be intuitive and easy to use. Let's move on to my next improvement, which is the combat system. Minecraft Java's melee combat from the beginning and prior to 1.9 was very simple, as it merely consisted of spamming the left click on the mouse to attack. The 1.9 combat update, however, sought to make the combat more nuanced and less dull by changing the clicky combat system into one that's based on timing. This new timed system displays a meter above the cursor, which immediately drops to 0% of its capacity after attacking, and slowly fills back to 100%. The capacity of this meter determines attack strength, where attacking at 0%, the least amount of damage possible would be dealt, while attacking at 100%, the most amount of damage possible would be dealt. This system discouraged spam clicking, as subsequent rapid attacks would deal less damage than slow timed ones. Many players were up in arms due to this Minecraft change, especially the PvP community, as the game was changed so much that it was essentially a new product. It would be like Call of Duty removing all fully automatic weapons from their multiplayer mode, and not letting players access them again. The problem is, you can't change the fundamentals of a PvP multiplayer game without understandably angering its players. It's the equivalent of unplugging someone's Xbox, handing them a Nintendo Switch, and telling them to play that instead. All that being said, I'm not a Minecraft PvP player, and I never have been. I've always been a survival guy, but I do understand the anger of the PvP community. I'm pretty familiar with the spam clicky combat system, as Bedrock also uses it, and still has it, and I never really had any complaints other than finding it a little boring after a while. When I switched to Java and tried its combat, I did feel a bit handicapped at first, but eventually grew to love it. The combat definitely achieves its goal in making melee feel less dull, as attacks need to be timed properly and intelligently. This makes the game slightly more challenging, and for the first time in a while, I've actually died while going out and fighting mobs. I also like how the combat system encourages the use of enchantments other than sharpness for swords. Before, you could just put sharpness 5 on your sword and absolutely destroy anything in your path, but now since you can't spam click, you might want to throw in smite 5 to help you deal with skeletons and zombies. Or if you want to stick with sharpness, then the fire aspect enchantment is more useful now and can help you build up damage a lot quicker. I really like game mechanics that encourage you to use other game mechanics that you wouldn't even have thought of using, as they give the feel that the game was intelligently designed. Speaking of things being intelligently designed, we have the offhand feature, which was also added to Java in the 1.9 update, and works by assigning the mouse's left click to the right hand, and the mouse's right click to the left hand. That sounds kinda confusing, but it's really not, I promise. This feature is glaringly downgraded in Bedrock, as the offhand slot is limited to only certain items, the most useful being maps, totems of undying, firework rockets, tipped arrows, and shields. Java, on the other hand, has a plethora of left and right hand combinations, with a lot of them being game-changing. Initially, I thought I was only going to be putting torches in the offhand, but as I played around with it some more, I found some really useful combinations. One that I rely on a lot is the building block and corresponding tool combination. It makes it so you can place blocks with your offhand while having your tool equipped in your right hand to correct any mistakes you make. Although I do find it annoying that if you want to place something next to a dirt block while having a shovel equipped, it'll make that dirt block a path block. The same thing goes with having an axe equipped and trying to place something next to a wood log, which will instead strip that log. It's slightly annoying, and I wish there was some sort of toggle on this. Another combination I use all the time, and especially with the more challenging combat, is having my sword in the right hand and food in the offhand. When running around and fighting hostile mobs, my hunger bar always depletes super quickly, so it's really useful to be able to eat the food with one click, as opposed to searching for it in my hotbar. Alternatively, in the nether, I felt a lot safer placing a milk bucket in my offhand, as fighting wither skeletons can be daunting with that nasty wither effect. You could also place a fire resistance potion in the offhand, in case you accidentally fall in lava. Oh, and here's one that took me way too long to realize. So you know how you can break gravel or sand by placing a torch underneath it, but then you always have to break the gravel with your torch and it takes forever? Well, just place the torch in your offhand and a shovel in your right hand, and use the shovel to break the block, and then just right click to place the torch. Like, how beautiful is that? As you can probably tell, I really love this feature, and Bedrock's a pain to play without it now. Next, I'm going to be talking about some areas where Java comes up short. The first is the ability to build bridges or add blocks to a platform in the same way that you can do it on Bedrock. You do this simply by clicking the area where the block will end up, but keep in mind that the block has to be next to another block, and you can't place it in midair. It makes building these bridges so easy and comfortable. In Java, however, you actually have to crouch and click the side of a block to place a block next to it, which makes building platforms and bridges a lot more tedious and time consuming. It also makes building bridges across the nether way more dangerous, as you have to get on the very edge of a block to add another one to it. And I'm mentioning this because I always have terrible luck and end up spawning in a floating island surrounded by lava. When in the nether, I also rely on scaffolding to get me down from high places, which brings me to the next area in which Java falls short, its scaffolding system. This one is kind of baffling, as I didn't think that scaffolding would operate completely differently in Java. For those of you who don't know, scaffolding is one of the greatest blocks that's been added to Minecraft, as it tackles one of my biggest problems with building and survival, the inability to fly. Scaffolding solves this problem without even giving you the ability to fly, as it allows you to get to those hard to reach areas. Before, you would have to make a dirt tower, which would limit your movement and was more tedious to break afterwards. Scaffolding, on the other hand, allows you to build climbable structures that are easy to move through and only take one block to break them down. These structures will help you build at tall heights and reach ores on the ceiling of caves, but can also come in handy to get down from high places. When at a high altitude, just place scaffolding next to a block like this, and they will fall all the way down to the floor level. I find this really useful in the Nether because you can't place water buckets there to descend from high places. On Bedrock, you place one scaffolding block on top of another by either clicking the top of the block or the space under it. While on Java, the only way to do this is to click the side of the block, which makes it really annoying to add more blocks to your tower once you're at the top. Clicking the top of the block on Java actually adds blocks to the side of it, which is the most confusing aspect of Java's scaffolding system. Crouching is also kind of weird in this system, as it will always make you descend, even if you're on a floating piece of scaffolding. Also, using scaffolding to get down from high places is more tedious in Java, as you have to build the blocks out like this until you reach the limit and they start falling. I think scaffolding in Java is just weird and confusing, whereas in Bedrock, it's the perfect system. The last two things I'll talk about are pretty minor, but they still annoy the heck out of me. First of all, why can't I see enchantments in Java while selecting a tool in the hotbar? This still drives me nuts, as I now have to open my inventory to be able to differentiate my 15 pickaxes. I found myself switching to different tools and subconsciously expecting to see the enchantments, only to be disappointed and have nothing pop up. Lastly, the XYZ coordinates, which I always rely on for building and mining. On Java, you can see them by pressing F3, but then you get all this information, which takes up the majority of your screen. You can decrease the GUI scale, but this will shrink everything, so you can't win either way. It would have been nice if they had a setting that lets you see just the coordinates like Bedrock does. Look at that. Nice and big, and I can see my coordinates all the time. I rely on the coordinates so much that I downloaded a mod called GUI Compass just to be able to see them. While these annoyances are in fact annoying, I think they're overall worth putting up with, as the great features that Java does have outweigh the bad ones. These struggles are also unique to me and other Bedrock players, as I don't think the Java-only players have noticed them, other than maybe the coordinates. Either way, I love Minecraft, and the Java version is definitely a much needed breath of fresh air for me. I encourage all you Bedrock players to give Java a try, and put aside the petty Java versus Bedrock debate, as I think both versions have their great exclusive features. Until next time, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.